My name is Ahmed, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been rooted in the teachings of Islam. I was born into a devout family where faith wasn't just a part of life, it was the foundation of everything we did. 5 times a day, I would bow in prayer, reciting the verses of the Quran with reverence. The mosque was my sanctuary, a place where I sought peace and guidance. I took pride in my devotion, believing that my dedication to Allah and the principles of Islam would lead me to eternal salvation. My understanding of the world was shaped by the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. I studied the hadiths, memorized key surahs, and sought answers to life's questions through Islamic scholarship. There was a rhythm to my life, a sense of purpose that came from knowing I was walking the straight path, as the Quran described. Yet even in my unwavering faith, there were moments of doubt that I couldn't ignore. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake questioning the nature of God and the idea of salvation. The Quran spoke of deeds being weighed on the day of judgment, but what if I hadn't done enough? What if, despite my efforts, my sins outweighed my good deeds? These thoughts were fleeting, buried quickly by prayer and study, but they lingered in the back of my mind like a faint shadow. I had always respected other religions. As a student of theology, I found it fascinating to learn about the beliefs of others, particularly Christianity. But to me, Christianity was flawed. The idea that Jesus could be the Son of God seemed, frankly, absurd. Jesus was a prophet, respected and revered, yes, but a man like all the other prophets. The concept of the Trinity was incomprehensible to me, and the notion of salvation through grace alone felt like a shortcut that undermined the importance of effort and accountability. For years, I carried this conviction with me, debating Christians whenever the opportunity arose. I was confident in my arguments, quoting the Quran and dismantling what I saw as inconsistencies in the Bible. My faith felt unshakable, and I prided myself on defending Islam with clarity and logic. Yet beneath this certainty, the quiet doubts remained. It was during a trip to visit my family in another city that everything changed. The day had started like any other. I woke early for Fajr prayer, recited my usual supplications, and spent the morning discussing theology with my younger brother. As the afternoon wore on, I began to feel unwell, just a slight discomfort in my chest that I dismissed as nothing serious. By evening, the discomfort had turned into a sharp, stabbing pain that made it difficult to breathe. "Ahmed, we're going to the hospital," my brother said firmly, grabbing his keys. I protested, as I always did when it came to medical issues. "It's probably just indigestion. I'll be fine." But the pain didn't subside. By the time we arrived at the emergency room, I could barely stand. The doctors quickly assessed me and ran tests, their faces growing more serious with each passing minute. Within an hour, I was on a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, as they explained that I was experiencing a severe heart attack. My mind raced as I listened to their words. A heart attack? At my age? It didn't make sense. I had always taken care of myself, eating right, exercising, praying regularly. How could this be happening to me? As the doctors worked to stabilize me, I felt a wave of fear unlike anything I had ever known. I thought of my family, my life, and the prayers I had yet to offer. Was this how it was going to end? Was I about to meet my Creator, unprepared and uncertain? The room began to blur, the voices of the medical staff fading into the background. My chest felt like it was being crushed, and each breath grew more labored than the last. I closed my eyes, whispering the Shahada, the declaration of faith, over and over. desperate to cling to the one thing I had always believed would save me. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Darkness enveloped me, and for a moment, there was nothing. No pain, no sound, no light, just silence. But deep within that silence, I felt an overwhelming sense that this wasn't the end. Something, someone, was waiting for me. And then, the darkness shifted. My world faded completely, leaving behind the faintest trace of anticipation, as though I was standing on the edge of a vast, unknown journey. I had no idea what was about to unfold, but I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change forever. When I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I did, I wasn't in my body anymore. It was the strangest sensation, like floating, but with no sense of weight. I looked down and saw myself lying there on the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses working frantically. My chest rose and fell shallowly, the machines beeping erratically. My brother stood nearby, his face pale and filled with worry, his hands gripping the edge of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. I should have felt panic, but I didn't. Instead, I was strangely calm, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. I tried to speak, to call out to my brother, to tell him I was still here, but no sound came from my mouth. In fact, I wasn't sure I even had a mouth in this form. I wasn't in pain anymore, but I also felt an odd detachment, like I was tethered to a different reality, observing everything but unable to interact. What is happening, I thought, my mind racing? Am I dead? The thought sent a chill through me. My faith had taught me that after death, the soul is judged, its deeds weighed, and its fate decided. But this wasn't what I had imagined. There were no angels, no familiar scenes of judgment. Just me, floating above my own body, caught between confusion and an eerie stillness. And then I noticed it. A light. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen. It wasn't blinding or harsh, but it radiated an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through me. It pulsed softly, growing brighter with each passing moment, as though it were alive. The light wasn't coming from the hospital room. It was somewhere beyond, distant yet incredibly close. I felt its pull immediately, an irresistible draw that seemed to reach deep into the core of whatever I was now. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Every instinct told me to resist, to stay rooted to the reality I knew. But the light had a magnetism that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a visual phenomenon. It was a presence. It seemed to call to me, not with words, but with a feeling so profound I couldn't put it into context. The room around me began to fade. The sounds of the monitors, the voices of the doctors, even the sight of my brother. It all started to dissolve, replaced by a vast, all-encompassing brightness. I felt as though I were being pulled through a tunnel, the light growing closer and closer. At first, I tried to resist, but I quickly realized it was futile. The pull wasn't forceful or violent. It was gentle, yet utterly undeniable. As I moved toward the light, I began to feel something new. Warmth. Not the kind of warmth you get from sitting in the sun, but a deep, soul-penetrating warmth that seemed to fill every part of me. It was soothing, yet it carried an undercurrent of power that left me in awe. The light wasn't just something to be seen, it was something to be felt, something alive. What is this? I asked myself, though the question felt insignificant in the presence of the light. Where am I going? A part of me felt trepidation, a fear of the unknown that gripped my mind. I had been taught all my life to believe in certain things, to trust in the Quran and the teachings of Islam. This wasn't part of any scripture I had studied. The light didn't fit into my understanding of what was supposed to happen after death, and that scared me. But there was another part of me, one that couldn't deny the pull of the light. It wasn't just calling to me, it was inviting me. And deep down, I knew this was no ordinary experience. This was something divine, something that would shatter everything I thought I knew. I moved closer, and the warmth grew stronger. The light seemed to envelop me, and for the first time, I felt something else. Peace. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, even in my most fervent prayers, or moments of clarity during meditation. It was complete, all-encompassing, as though every worry, every doubt, every fear had been stripped away. Yet as peaceful as it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something profound was about to happen. This wasn't just an experience, it was a moment of reckoning, a turning point in my very existence. The light wasn't just a destination, it was a doorway, and I was about to step through. I hesitated for a brief moment, hovering at the edge of the light. I felt unworthy, unprepared. What lay beyond? What was waiting for me? But the light seemed to answer my unspoken questions with its presence, reassuring me without words. With a deep breath, or what felt like one, I stepped into the light. And in that moment, I knew that everything was about to change. As I stepped fully into the light, everything around me transformed. The warmth I had felt before now wrapped around me completely, filling me with a sense of peace that was both overwhelming and humbling. The brightness was no longer just light, it was alive, vibrant, and pulsating with power. I felt as though I was standing in the presence of something infinitely greater than myself, something beyond comprehension. And then I saw him. At first, it was difficult to make sense of what I was seeing. A figure emerged from the brilliance of the light, radiating a presence so powerful and majestic that I was immediately struck by a profound sense of awe. He stepped closer, and as he did, I felt waves of love and compassion washing over me. It wasn't just an emotion, it was as though the very essence of love was emanating from him, surrounding and filling me. Who are you? I managed to ask, though the words felt small and inadequate in the enormity of the moment. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through me, into my heart, my soul, and every hidden corner of my being. His gaze was not condemning, but deeply understanding, as though he knew everything about me, yet still loved me completely. "I am Jesus," he said. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. Jesus? My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. As a Muslim, I had always believed in Jesus as a prophet, a great prophet even, but nothing more. The idea that he could be the Son of God was something I had dismissed outright, something I had debated against countless times. And yet, here he was, standing before me, more real than anything I had ever experienced. "That's not possible," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You're just a prophet. How can this be?" Jesus smiled, a smile filled with patience and kindness. "You have many questions, Ahmed," he said, "and I am here to help you find the answers." I wanted to speak, to argue, to make sense of what I was seeing. But before I could, the world around us began to shift. Scenes appeared in the light, vivid and full of life, as though I were being transported to another time and place. The first scene was familiar, stories from the Quran about Jesus. I saw him healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, and even raising the dead. These were miracles I had always accepted as truth, but now Seeing them with my own eyes, they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The compassion in his touch, the authority in his words, it was unlike anything I had ever imagined. Then the scenes began to change. I saw moments I recognized not from the Quran, but from the Bible, moments I had dismissed before. I saw Jesus at the Last Supper, speaking to his disciples with a love that transcended human understanding. I saw him praying in the garden, his anguish palpable as he prepared to sacrifice himself. And then I saw the crucifixion. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I saw the nails, the crown of thorns, the pain etched into his face. But even in that agony, there was something else, a strength, a purpose. This wasn't just suffering, it was an act of unparalleled love. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why did you do this? For you, he said simply. For all of you. The words pierced through me. My understanding of salvation had always been tied to deeds, to earning favor through actions. The idea that someone would take on the burden of humanity's sins, willingly sacrificing himself out of love, was almost too much to comprehend. The scenes shifted again, and this time I was shown passages from the Quran and the Bible side by side. Jesus pointed to prophecies in the Quran that I had read countless times but never truly understood. Passages that spoke of the Messiah, of salvation, of a light to the nations. And then he showed me their fulfillment in the Bible, how every prophecy pointed to him. How could I not see this? I asked, my heart heavy with realization. How did I miss the truth? You were searching, Ahmed, Jesus said, his voice gentle, and now you have found it. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of his words sank in. Everything I had believed, everything I had clung to, was being turned upside down. Yet in the midst of this upheaval, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as though the pieces of a puzzle I had been struggling to solve my entire life were finally falling into place. There is more to see, Jesus said, his eyes filled with compassion. Will you come with me? I nodded, though my mind was still spinning. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing. My life would never be the same. As Jesus extended his hand toward me, the world around us shifted once again. The light seemed to expand, enveloping everything, and I felt a sudden weightlessness, as though I was being carried to a new realm. I wasn't afraid, I trusted him, though I still didn't fully understand what was happening or why. The first thing I saw was breathtaking. It was a place filled with colors, more vibrant than anything I had ever known. The air was alive, with a sense of peace, joy, and harmony. There was no pain, no suffering, no sadness, only love, pure and overwhelming. In the distance, I saw people of every kind, their faces glowing with a joy that seemed to come from within. They moved freely, laughing and embracing one another as though they were finally complete. This is heaven, Jesus said, his voice filled with warmth. This is what it means to be united with God. I could barely speak. The beauty of it all was almost too much to bear. It's perfect, I finally managed to say. This is what I've prayed for, isn't it? Jesus nodded. It is the fulfillment of God's promise, but it is not earned by deeds alone. It is a gift given freely through faith. The words struck me like a thunderbolt. In my faith, everything was about balance, good deeds outweighing bad, prayers offered at the right times, fasting observed correctly. But here Jesus was, telling me that it wasn't about earning salvation. It was about grace. Grace? I asked, my voice trembling with both confusion and hope. What do you mean? Ahmed, Jesus said gently, no one can earn perfection. No one can live without sin, no matter how much they try. God's love is not something to be earned. It is something to be accepted. That is why I gave my life, for you, for everyone, so that through me, you could be free. His words shook the foundation of everything I had believed. My life had been built on striving, on doing enough to be worthy in the eyes of God. But here, in this place of perfect peace, I was being told that it wasn't about being worthy. It was about trusting in Him. Before I could fully process what He was saying, the scene shifted. The warmth and light faded, replaced by a cold, oppressive darkness. I felt the change immediately, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The air was thick and heavy, and in the distance, I heard faint cries, anguished, desperate, and hopeless. "This is hell," Jesus said, his tone sorrowful. "This is separation from God." I didn't want to see it, but the vision grew clearer. I saw figures moving in the shadows, their faces contorted in pain and regret. They reached out, as though searching for something, someone, but there was no answer. The sense of despair was overwhelming, and it pierced me to my very soul. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why do they suffer like this?" "They chose separation," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "God's love is offered to everyone, but not everyone accepts it. Hell is not a place of God's wrath. It is the absence of His presence. It is the natural result of rejecting the gift of salvation." I couldn't look away. The suffering, the emptiness, it was more terrible than anything I had ever imagined. And yet, even in the midst of that darkness, I felt a deep sense of love radiating from Jesus. It was as though His heart ached for every soul that had chosen to turn away. "Do you understand now, Ahmed?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine. "The choices you make in life matter, not because of what you can earn, but because of the relationship you choose to have with God." Tears streamed down my face as his words sank in. I had spent my life striving, praying, fasting, and doing everything I could to be good enough. But here, in the presence of Jesus, I realized that all He wanted was my heart. "Ahmed," he said, his voice soft but firm, "will you accept my gift? Will you trust me to lead you to the Father?" I hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of the weight of the moment. Everything I had ever believed, everything I had ever lived for, was being called into question. But deep down, I knew the truth. I could feel it in every part of me. "Yes," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I trust you." The light around us grew brighter, warmer, and I felt a sense of peace, unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just peace, it was freedom. Freedom from fear, from striving, from the burden of trying to earn what could only be given. "There is more for you to do," Jesus said, his tone filled with purpose. "You must return and share what you have seen." "Return?" I asked, startled. "But I don't want to leave. I want to stay here, with you." He smiled, a smile that was both comforting and challenging. "Your time here is not yet finished. There are people who need to hear your story, Ahmed. They need to know the truth." The light began to shift again, and I felt a pull, as though I were being drawn back to the world I had left behind. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. Jesus had given me a purpose, and I couldn't ignore it. As the vision of heaven and hell faded, His final words echoed in my mind. "Go, Ahmed, share the truth. I will be with you always." When I opened my eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room replaced the radiance of the divine light I had just left. My chest burned with pain, and the sound of beeping machines filled the air. The sterile scent of antiseptic hit me, and I realized I was back in my body, back in the world I thought I had left behind. Voices echoed around me, filled with urgency and relief. "He's back," one of the doctors exclaimed. I blinked, my vision blurry, trying to focus on the figures moving around me. My brother's face came into view, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and joy. "Ahmed, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded weakly, but I couldn't find the words to respond. My mind was racing, trying to reconcile the overwhelming experience I had just gone through with the reality I was now in. I had been in the presence of Jesus. I had seen heaven and hell. And now I was here, lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by people who couldn't possibly understand what had just happened to me. The doctors were speaking in hurried tones, marveling at how my condition had stabilized so suddenly. "It's a miracle," one of them said, shaking his head. "We thought we'd lost him." My brother gripped my hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Alhamdulillah," he whispered. "You're alive, alive." The word felt heavy, almost foreign. Just moments ago, or at least it felt like moments, I had been standing in a realm beyond anything this world could offer. I had seen the face of Jesus. I had heard his voice, felt his love, and accepted his call. And now, I was here again, in a body that felt foreign, in a world that suddenly seemed so small. For the first few hours, I didn't speak much. My family stayed by my side, their relief evident in every glance and gesture. But inside, I was wrestling with a storm of emotions. What had I just experienced? How could I reconcile it with everything I had believed my entire life? Jesus wasn't just a prophet. That much was clear. He was so much more. But what did that mean for me? For my faith? For my family? And my community? The weight of it all felt suffocating. Late that night, when the hospital was quiet and my family had gone home to rest, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the encounter in my mind. The light, the love, the visions of heaven and hell, and Jesus' words, they were all so vivid, so undeniable, yet I couldn't shake the fear. If I spoke about this, what would happen? My family had always been devout, proud of their heritage and beliefs. How could I tell them that everything we had believed might not be the full truth? I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep, but instead, I saw his face again, kind, loving, and patient. His words echoed in my mind. "Go, Ahmed. Share the truth. I will be with you always." The thought both comforted and terrified me. Over the next few days, as my body slowly recovered, my mind remained restless. I couldn't ignore what I had seen, but I also couldn't talk about it. Not yet. I needed answers, clarity, something to help me make sense of it all. One afternoon, when I was finally alone, I reached for my phone and began searching. I didn't even know where to start, but eventually, I found myself reading about Jesus in ways I never had before. I read about his teachings, his miracles, his sacrifice. I read about grace, this concept that had seemed so foreign to me during our encounter, but now felt like a lifeline. And then, for the first time in my life, I opened a Bible. It felt strange, almost forbidden, but as I began to read, I couldn't stop. The words leapt off the page, resonating with everything I had experienced. It was as if the book itself was alive, speaking directly to my soul. The more I read, the more the pieces began to fit together. Passages from the Quran that had always puzzled me now made sense in light of what I was learning about Jesus. Prophecies I had overlooked or misunderstood were suddenly clear. But with every revelation, the weight of my decision grew heavier. I couldn't keep this to myself forever. I had been called to share the truth, but the thought of doing so filled me with dread. How would my family react? My community? My entire identity was rooted in being a devout Muslim. What would they think if I told them I had encountered Jesus and accepted him as the Son of God? One night, as I lay in bed, the burden became too much to bear. I couldn't do this alone. I needed to talk to someone I trusted, someone who might understand. My brother's face came to mind. We had always been close, and while I knew he might struggle to believe me, I also knew he loved me enough to listen. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. When he answered, I could hear the concern in his voice. "Ahmed, is everything okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I need to tell you something. Something that happened while I was gone." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," he said cautiously. "What is it?" As I prepared to speak, I felt a wave of fear rise in my chest. But then I remembered Jesus' words, "I will be with you always." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. This was just the beginning. When I finally decided to share my story, it felt like stepping into a storm without knowing if I would emerge unscathed. I started small, confiding in my closest friend, Hassan. He had always been my sounding board, the person I could trust with anything, no matter how difficult. If anyone would understand, or at least listen, it would be him. "Hassan," I began hesitantly as we sat together over tea. "I need to tell you something, but it's different. It's about what happened when I was in the hospital." He raised an eyebrow, concern flashing across his face. "You mean when we thought we'd lost you?" I nodded. "Yes. I didn't just lose consciousness, Hassan. I went somewhere. I saw something, someone." His expression grew serious, and he leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Taking a deep breath, I recounted everything. My out-of-body experience, the light, meeting Jesus, and the vivid visions of heaven and hell. I told him how Jesus spoke to me, how he explained grace and salvation, and how he invited me to follow him. When I finished, there was a long silence. Hassan stared at me, his face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something I couldn't quite identify. "Ahmed," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "you've always been a man of faith, a man who seeks truth. But it's hard to believe. Are you sure it wasn't just a dream? The mind can do strange things when the body is under stress." "I've thought about that," I admitted. "But this wasn't a dream, Hassan. It was more real than anything I've ever experienced. I felt his presence. I saw heaven, I saw hell, and I know what he told me is true." He looked away, struggling to process my words. "You're saying that everything we've believed, everything we've lived by, isn't the whole truth?" "No," I said gently. "I'm saying that the truth is bigger than we thought. Jesus isn't just a prophet, he's the Messiah, he's the way to God." Hassan shook his head, his disbelief evident. "Ahmed, this could ruin you. If you tell people about this, you know how they'll react." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "But I can't keep this to myself. I was shown the truth, Hassan. How can I stay silent?" He didn't respond, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to dismiss me, to chalk this up to delirium or imagination. But another part of him, the part that knew me deeply, was listening, considering, and perhaps even questioning. Over the next few days, I shared my story with a few others, people I trusted, people who knew my heart. Some reacted like Hassan, with skepticism mixed with concern. Others were outright dismissive, unwilling to entertain the idea that I could have encountered Jesus. But a few listened with an open mind, asking questions, curious about what I had experienced. One of those was an older man from our community, someone I had always admired for his wisdom and gentleness. When I told him my story, he didn't interrupt or argue. Instead, he said, "Ahmed, truth has a way of finding us, even when we're not looking for it. Perhaps this is God's way of opening a new path for you." His words gave me courage. If even one person could see the sincerity in my heart, maybe others would too. I knew I couldn't stop there. Jesus had told me to share the truth, and I felt a growing conviction that I needed to do so publicly, no matter the cost. It wasn't about me, it was about him, about the message he had entrusted to me. So one evening, I stood before a small gathering of people, family, friends, and a few curious strangers. My heart pounded as I began to speak, but I felt a steadying presence, as though Jesus himself was standing beside me. "I know many of you will find this hard to believe," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "But I must tell you what happened to me. When I was at the brink of death, I encountered Jesus. He showed me the truth about God, about heaven and hell, and about grace, and he called me to share this with you." The room was silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. I saw a range of reactions: shock, confusion, curiosity, and even anger. But I pressed on, sharing every detail of my experience, every revelation, and every truth I had learned. When I finished, some people walked out, their faces closed off. Others stayed, their expressions thoughtful, as though they were wrestling with something deep within. And a few approached me, their eyes filled with questions. "Do you really believe this?" one man asked, his tone skeptical, but not dismissive. "I don't just believe it," I said. "I know it, and I hope you'll seek the truth for yourself." Over time, I began to find ways to bridge the gap between my Islamic upbringing and my newfound faith in Jesus. I spoke about the shared values of love, compassion, and devotion to God. I showed how the prophecies in the Quran pointed to Jesus and how his message fulfilled the promises of God. My goal wasn't to tear down anyone's beliefs, but to open their hearts to the possibility of something greater. The more I shared, the more I saw lives being touched. Some people were moved to explore the Bible for the first time, while others began to question the rigidity of their own perspectives. And through it all, I felt Jesus guiding me, giving me the words to say and the strength to keep going. But I knew the journey wasn't over. There was still more to do, more people to reach, and more challenges to face. And as I prepared to take the next step, I prayed for courage, knowing that my testimony could inspire others, but also bring me face to face with rejection and loss. Yet, in the depths of my heart, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't alone. Jesus was with me, just as he had promised, and that truth was enough to carry me forward. As I stepped fully into my new life with Jesus, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. For so long, my faith had been about striving, praying the right way, fasting the right way, doing enough to tip the scales of righteousness in my favor. But now, I understood that it wasn't about what I could do. It was about what Jesus had already done. Accepting him as my Savior wasn't an easy decision, but it was the most freeing one I had ever made. For the first time, I felt complete. The weight of my doubts and fears had been lifted, replaced by a certainty that God's love wasn't something I had to earn. It was a gift. The journey that followed was both beautiful and challenging. I knew my testimony had the power to inspire, but it also had the potential to alienate. I began speaking publicly, sharing my experience with anyone willing to listen. I told them about the moment I met Jesus, the visions of heaven and hell, and the message of grace that had changed my life. At first, the responses were mixed. Some people were curious, asking thoughtful questions about my encounter and how it aligned with the teachings of both the Quran and the Bible. Others were skeptical, accusing me of being deceived or abandoning my faith. The hardest reactions came from those closest to me, my family. When I told my parents about my experience, their initial reaction was one of shock. "Ahmed, how could you say such things?" my father asked, his voice trembling with both anger and pain. "We raised you to honor our faith, to live by the teachings of Islam, and now you're saying that everything we've believed isn't enough." "It's not about rejecting what we've believed," I said gently. "It's about seeing it fulfilled. Jesus isn't just a prophet. He's the way to God. He showed me this himself." My mother's eyes filled with tears, and I could see the struggle in her heart. She wanted to understand, but it was difficult for her to reconcile my words with the faith she had held all her life. My siblings were equally divided, some dismissing my story outright, others quietly curious but afraid to say so. Those moments were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The fear of losing my family was real, but so was the call to share the truth. I prayed constantly for their understanding, for their hearts to be open to the message of Jesus. Even as I faced rejection, I found comfort and strength in a new spiritual family. A local church welcomed me with open arms, their warmth and encouragement helping me navigate the challenges of this new path. They didn't see me as someone who had left one faith for another. They saw me as a brother in Christ, someone who had been found by grace. In those early days, I also began connecting with others who had experienced similar journeys. Former Muslims, Christians with Muslim backgrounds, and people from all walks of life who had encountered Jesus in profound ways. Their stories encouraged me, showing me that I wasn't alone in this transformation. As I continued to share my testimony, I began to see lives being changed. People who had once been indifferent to faith started asking questions. Others who had been rigid in their beliefs began to consider the possibility that Jesus was more than a prophet. And some, like me, took the leap of faith to accept him as their savior. One of the most powerful moments came when my younger brother, who had initially dismissed my story, came to me late one night. "Ahmed," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said, about Jesus, about grace. I don't know if I believe it yet, but I want to learn more." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged him. "That's all I ask," I said. "Seek the truth. Jesus will meet you there." As my journey continued, I found ways to use my unique background to build bridges between Islam and Christianity. I spoke about the shared values of love, devotion, and the pursuit of truth. I highlighted the prophecies and teachings in the Quran that pointed to Jesus as the Messiah, showing how the two faiths were connected in ways many had never considered. But I also made it clear that the message of Jesus went beyond religion. It was about relationship, a personal connection with God, made possible through his sacrifice. It was about grace, forgiveness, and love that surpassed anything I had ever known. Looking back, I see how God used every part of my life, my upbringing, my doubts, even my struggles, to prepare me for this mission. The journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. Every rejection, every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt has been overshadowed by the joy of seeing lives transformed by the truth of Jesus. As I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with this. Seeking the truth takes courage. It means being willing to question everything you've known, to step into the unknown, and to trust that God will guide you. But I promise you this, it's worth it. If you've been touched by my story, if you've felt a stirring in your heart, I encourage you to seek Jesus. Open your heart to Him, and He will meet you where you are. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you'd like to share your thoughts or ask for prayer, please leave your name in the comments below. And if you're curious to hear more stories like mine, check out the videos on your screen now. Each one is a testament to the power of faith, grace, and God's unending love.